This meeting is being recorded.
Hello, Tawnya.
Hello. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, right? So today we're gonna do an interview with you on your book, A Heart of the Machine. Do you have a copy of it?
I do. It's very pretty.
It really nice. I've got to say it really turned out nice, man. All right. Let's get right down to it, right? You write in your book, there is the room where Gwen was born, and two other rooms holding artificial wombs made of plastic, chrome, and glass. In the future, we hope to be in the process of creating several ex machina at once. Now, was that the extra wombs, were they designed by Bellamy's father, Adam Krim, or Bellamy? And why? Since the ex machina's sole job, is to fight the Manto de Diaz. So why do they need so many? What's that?
Musk is too ambitious in some of the things that he was doing. I was thinking Adam Krim would kind of be the same way, where it's like, it isn't really necessary to have so many of these, but I think that like when he was creating it, that he just like thought it would be so like necessary for whatever reason to have all these robots.
Okay. Now, when Bellamy comes upon Yui and Shira doing Gwen's hair and talking to her, they fall silent. And Bellamy asks what things they were talking about. It finally comes out they were talking about death. Yui says that Gwen will most likely never die. What is Bellamy's reaction to that? And doesn't Bellamy consider his own mortality at that point? But Gwen does. What is her reaction to this? So what's Bellamy's reaction to it? And what's Gwen's reaction to it?
Very morose, very sullen. It's kind of like the first time that she really realizes how kind of sad death is, and knowing that she'll never experience it, but everyone else around her sort of will. And Bellamy, I think, has, he survived the alien invasion. He's lived like a really cushy lifestyle despite it being the apocalypse, that it's almost like he's kind of childish and immature in the sense of like, well, I won't die for a long time, so I don't need to worry about it. Whereas like, I think a lot of people do think about that, but he's kind of in his own little world. And since he's already survived so many tragedies, it's kind of like, oh, well, it's not going to happen for a long time. I've already survived everything else. Whereas like Gwen, these emotions are very new for her. They're very scary.
Right. Do you think Yui described death to Gwen?
I think that because the way that Yui's described in the book is like, she's just very precise, flowery person. So I don't think that she meant to offend or upset Gwen, but I think that she just kind of had like that moment of like, kind of like when you're teaching a little kid when like the pet dies, like, well, you have to have that talk with them eventually. Right. I think it was kind of like that.
Did Gwen see any death to identify death? Or did Gwen see any death to identify with?
I guess when I really think about the book, it's like she's only had the information fed to her, and then she kills the Manto Dia, but she has never really witnessed, I guess that you can be, kind of like, the spool of information in the device could kind of tell her what death is, but you don't really, again, it's like a thing that you don't really know until you experience it.
Right. And her first experience with death was the death of the Manto Dia, right?
Yeah, which is, to her, they're like a pest. It's not really anything that is like she's like emotionally attached to.
Right. Now you write an interesting line that says, I watch her bite into the apple I gave her with a steel jaw. She is polite, but something about her indestructible teeth and the ability to chew through 10 feet of metal intimidates me. What is the science behind Gwen? I never thought of her biting through 10 feet of metal, but so I'm curious. In other words, what is the full range of her capabilities?
So when it describes her in stasis, she's like in this blue liquid that is supposed to fortify her bones and make it so that they're essentially unbreakable, so that she can go into space. She can go deeper than most like submarines into the ocean if she so chose. And when I was writing it, I was thinking about how I'm like, well, teeth are technically bone. So even though they look like normal teeth, like Bellamy describes them as titanium teeth, but they are human looking teeth, but just like that they would be enhanced with that strength and not, that they wouldn't break. And because she like harnesses like the wires in her back harness like the electrical energy around her.
Right.
She doesn't need to sleep. She doesn't really need to eat. Like she can kind of sustain herself on energy, but she also has like the human capacity. Like Bellamy tries to get her to eat a few times and she's like, well, this is good. She thinks broccoli is vile. She thinks the texture is gross. Like, you know, just like kind of like a little kid would be like kind of testing, like, do I like this? No, I don't like this.
So she takes energy from the air through her wires on her back?
Yeah, I was learning about kind of like tech where, you know, like there's like solar panels and things that like harness energy. And I didn't realize that there is like in certain parts of the atmosphere, there's like a lot of electricity. So I was thinking that Gwen would kind of be able to sustain herself without like plugging into a battery or
Right.
have like, you know, this should be completely unhindered because she is kind of just able to sustain herself.
Right, right. Let's see. When Bellamy takes Gwen outside for the second time, he comes face to face with the Mantodia. Describe, if you will, the encounter and his salvation by Gwen. Detail the Mantodia and Gwen's method of destroying it.
So Bellamy, Gwen runs off. So Bellamy goes to chase after her, stepping into a hole, which he sprains and falls over and can't move. Where then he's approached by a female Mantidea, and he kind of just assumes like this is just the end for me. But Gwen is very quick to react. She protects him. She has like the wires go into the Mantidea and kind of shock off the exoskeleton, exposing the skin of the alien, which
Right.
is they're always in deep space. And so I thought it'd be kind of cool if like she electrocuted the exoskeleton off and that it was like kind of like they disintegrate in the sun, like the
Right,
actual
right.
skin of them. And Bellamy faints because it's so loud and it's so bright. I designed Bellamy as an autistic character. I don't know, like it's never mentioned in the book, and I don't know if I was
Yep.
successful in that endeavor, but that is why he's kind of sensitive to certain lights. He's like really particular about his food.
It comes off very well. You know, if I had to categorize Bellamy, I would say he was autistic.
Yeah, and that's what I wanted. Like I've never really, besides I think I read Flowers for Algernon when I was like 15. I thought that was a really interesting perspective. And then the movie Drive with Ryan Gosling came out when I was a teenager, and there was this speculation that
Right.
Ryan Gosling's character was autistic, but it was never mentioned. And I just thought that I was like, why don't we have a character, like a really prominent character in media that
Right.
is?
Right. That came across very well, actually. But did the killing of the Mantodia take a large amount of Gwen's energy, or is it minuscule to her?
I think it's very minuscule to her to kind of kill like even when they're like in squads at a time.
Right.
It's the ship that she has trouble with because that's what they want. They want to. She's like, if I can get through the ship, I can get to all of them, and she's not able to do that. So that's like the like kind of the barrier of her power, where she is very powerful, but that's like the one thing where the aliens have kind of topped her on that one.
Yeah, I guess so. I mean, all right, you're right. We are chest to chest. Well, wait a minute. First, medically, what is Bellamy's reaction to being saved, and why was he out for hours? And why were the others concerned that he might die after a simple ankle injury? You never say.
I think it's not so much that they were worried about the ankle injury, but that it's like Bellamy. I don't think that people really trust him because when they look at his father, they're like, he was kind of crazy. He was kind of willing to do whatever. And
Nope.
Bellamy leaving to the lab without Gwen's protection to go look for her. I think that the team just thought that that was a really bad move, and it really frightened them that they're like, this man is just going to wander out where there's these vicious aliens.
Right.
And I think it's more like they were afraid of his mental state rather than his physical injury.
They're worried about his mental state more so than his physical injury. Yeah, because his reaction to the light was so dramatic.
Yeah, like he talks about it throughout the book a lot too, where he's like, someone needs to dim these lights. These lights are so bright. I can't really stand the color red. Like he's very particular in the way that he goes about his routine and things that bother him.
Right, right. He's almost like an epileptic for the color red.
Yeah.
The color red induces seizures in some epileptics, right? So
it does. Yeah.
All right. You're right. We are chest to chest. Her heart beats next to mine. She is part machine, but also very much alive. The ex machina is embracing me. She is being sweet, but I have the disturbed thought she would crush me if she wanted to. Gwen's arms can bend steel. She could press molten rock into sapphires and diamonds. Gwen can rip through a military tank. Now, that's a fairly frightening description of Gwen. At the same time, you can see Bellamy's growing awareness of her powers and his anxiety at that. You can tell that the others have thought that she could turn on them too. What are the psychodynamics of walking that fine line between trying to build a mental barrier so that Gwen won't kill them and trying to inject some empathy in her, while at the same time keeping her mission focused? After all, her primary reason d'etre is to kill the Mater Dei.
So I think that Bellamy, his friend, the only person that he really feels like he relates to in the lab, one of the scientists that works for him, Hodaka, kind of is like, we should be really wary of this project. Like, don't be too emotional. Like, don't be too giving to her, but also don't be too withholding, because we don't want to suffer from her like cruel intentions, essentially. So Bellamy tries really hard to be, he's like kind of almost really passive in the beginning, like when she's being very affectionate towards him and he doesn't want to start something that he shouldn't. But as time goes on, he's like, I feel like if I don't reciprocate some of these feelings, she is going to get angry and she's not going to help us.
So he's fearful of her, right?
It's like he's in awe of her and he really cares about her, but he is deep down very, very frightened of her.
Yep, that's what I thought. All the other people are too, right? At the science.
I think that the like Katsuo and Shira are the most scared of her out of the group.
Right. And Shira later on becomes resentful of her, right?
She does, because Gwen kind of goes through this phase of expressing her sexuality, like wearing makeup, wearing short dresses, things that she thinks is like, well, why is like the ex machina that we created to save humanity, why is it acting this way? And Bellamy becomes upset that he's like, you act like you're such a feminist, but you're upset that the cyborg is doing this. And so it was like kind of like a moment of that she does, obviously Shira's like, this is not a woman, this is a weapon.
Right. I think that's an odd thought, but yeah, it's fairly true, right? Now, speaking of the Mater Dei, they must be incredibly strong too to decimate entire armies and kill off 70% of the world's population, right? What is the science between their domination of the entire world? In other words, how did they do it?
So what Bellamy talks about when they first came to Earth, that they came in like these giant clusters and that there was just like a whole bunch of them kind of ravaging Earth. And as time has gone on, like he describes looking out the single window in the lab and you don't see any flying by for days at a time. So they're very spread out at a certain point. But in the beginning, they were just kind of very destructive. But I did think that it'd be kind of interesting that, so they're from deep space, but I thought that because they're kind of like insects, you know, they're like a praying mantis, that they don't like the cold places on Earth, so that like people would still be kind of like not living a normal life, probably be living like a really like underground, maybe not necessarily as much as Bellamy, but an underground lifestyle, like in parts of Canada, Mongolia, Russia, places that were snowy. I just thought that they would avoid places like that, just because even though they can fly through deep space where it's really cold, that they choose to be comfortable when they are on the planet.
That's really odd. Did the Mater Dei communicate? They didn't have a language, in other words. I'm really curious, right?
So I didn't really think of them as talking, but I really enjoy Stephen King's Cell with the cell phone, like, and it was very creepy how it's like there are no kind of words, but there's like this weird buzzing sort of communication. And they talk about the Mater Dei, like they screech and they scream, but they don't really talk, but like their antennas move in all sorts of ways. And that's like kind of like their telepathic way of communicating with each other.
Okay. Now, Gwen asked Bellamy this telling question, which I think is it's almost underlying everything else, right? Gwen asked him, what am I? How do you answer that? What is she?
Well, I think sort of like in the beginning, he was like, this is humanity's savior. This is like my father's project. This is my life's work. It was more like in this academic field. And then it gets to a point where he's like, he realizes that he's like, Gwen's just like the most important person in the world to me. And I think a lot of that comes from his father was very distant. His mom dies a couple years after the invasion. He describes not having any siblings, but wishing that he did. And in a kind of weird way, I think that he thinks of Gwen as like the only family that he has left.
Right, right. Now, yeah, I guess that's true, actually. The only family he has left. I mean, after Bellamy takes her out for the third time, and Gwen kills a squad of Mantadillas, Bellamy thinks that he loves Gwen, right? But he is frightened of her. You said it explicitly in the book. He is frightened of her. How is that possible that one man holds such diverse emotions in his body, right? Do you think that Bellamy could never truly fall in love with the woman whom he is not frightened of?
I think that Bellamy has a lot of like weird emotional problems.
Right.
And when he describes his first love, Sophia, he describes it being like almost like it was so normal that it was like almost boring, that it just like wasn't for him. And so I think that he kind of has like this certain drive of looking for excitement, and Gwen is very exciting to him as much as like she frightens him. And I think that he makes like a comment a few times where he's like, well, all women scare me, but Gwen in particularly scares him the most.
I never thought of that. That observation that he's after excitement. He walks that fine line between excitement and fear and genuine love, right?
Yeah, I thought of like when he suffers like the alien invasion when he's 12 years old, it's like, it's so devastating, but then it's like almost like if that happens to you as like a kid, it's almost like nothing else compares. Nothing else is like, what is he waiting for? It's like he kind of has like this drive for excitement as much as like it was horrible that it happened to him.
Right, right. Yeah, that's curious. All right, Tawnya, that concludes today's interview, but would you be willing to be interviewed next week to further explain?
Yeah, I love you.
Oh, good, good. All right. Well, I'll see you later. And your book is Heart of the Machine by author Tawnya Torres. It's there, right? It's available in the store. All right. And Tawnya, I'll see you next time. All right. Bye-bye.
See you next
Wait a minute. No, I think